Patrick, you're here in Australia doing a bit of a tour, and also you're involved in a soil conference in Sydney next week. Can you give us a sense of what your sort of impression of regenerative ag in Australia as you've seen it in the last, week, and where you see that heading, if you spend enough time here to sort of grasp that?
Well, I'm in the middle of an amazing induction into what's going on here in Australia, and particularly, I have to say, at this place. For me, this centre brings together so many of the impulses which are arising at this time. Vertically integrated, organic and biodynamic vegetable production and livestock production, a bakery, a restaurant, an influence on public opinion, so beautifully put together that I haven't seen anything like this anywhere else in the world. So it touches me to be here. I think it's incredibly inspiring, and people say, different parts of the world are catching up with other parts, but I think there's something happening now which is an emergent new force, which I think is really in the world, and a change trying to happen, and all we need to do is to enable it to happen in the time that's needed, because the change is needed urgently. So I think a lot is going on here in Australia, and in some ways you're ahead of us.
Wow, fantastic. Hamish he's smirking over there. Patrick, you met Hamish, or you might have had some association with Hamish over the years, many years ago in the UK. I guess I'm giving Hamish a bit of a plug here. We're standing in front of some of the information and the way that Hamish teaches these courses. What's sort of your impression of the level of biodynamics, or the education that at least Australia is getting on with at this stage?
Well, I studied biodynamic agriculture at Emerson College in 1972-3, and if I'm honest, I went to Emerson not because I was a follower of anthroposophy or Steiner at the time. It was because it was the most evolved course in sustainable agriculture I could find when I wanted to learn more. But what I now realise is that all the great ideas that Steiner had were a more in-depth, born out of a more in-depth understanding of truly, deeply sustainable agriculture. And Hamish's course here, which I've just learned a little bit about, is bringing that together in a 21st century context. And I think that's something very interesting about what's happening here in Australia. You said yesterday, Hamish, that you thought that the conditions here in Australia were such that the land and the plants and the animals were more receptive to the forces that are brought by the use of biodynamic methods. And I'm embarrassed to say this, I'm patron of the UK Biodynamic Agricultural Association, but I'm standing at your feet in terms of knowledge.
Yeah, look, it's a bit more nuanced than that, but we also have very poor and shallow soils, or we now do. When white man came here, it looks like it was a very different situation. And what I've come to is that, like, the runt of the litter often has the fastest weight gain. Yeah, it won't ever catch up to, but you can actually see things happening faster with something that's starting from a very poor base.
Yeah,
so
you'll know we've degraded our soils in the UK. We've taken a bit longer to do it, but we're in a similarly impoverished state.
Yeah, so our soils, we've just had the blessing of getting it out there, and it works in a way that people in Europe don't see. Yeah, so we actually get that visual support from nature that in my years, I spent 6-7 years in the UK, people there don't see the same. Yeah, and so that's just been on one level an advantage at this level. Yeah, and a funny story about all this, because a few years ago, and I'm really lucky I saw this, there was an advertisement put out by the fertiliser companies, and they had these two scrawny hippie, like I'm hippie too, hippie guys digging up their horns, and a couple of prosperous looking guys with a crop up to their waist standing next door, taking the mickey out of these two guys digging up their horns. The ad only lasted a week or two because their phone lines were inundated with people asking about the car horns. Yeah, so it triggers something in the soul of human beings that there's something going on that they want to know about. Yeah, and our job is to make it knowledgeable and knowable. And in terms of how much I've known you, you've worked with the Soil Association, and now you've made this transition to the sustainable food, because that's where the consciousness is going. Yeah, the work, we've still got to do more work with the soil, but Maccas are looking for free-range eggs, Woolworths are looking to get more organic produce, so it's the food end and the consumer and all the knowledge around that is the next sort of area we really need to focus on. And the fact that you're going into that territory is really, important.
Something you said yesterday really interested me, which is, by way of an introduction, you talked about all the different strands of the sustainable agriculture movement, ranging from regenerative agriculture to organic farming to biodynamic farming. And you said that if we added them all together, we would have verging on a tipping point of practice which could reach mainstream.
Yeah.
But of course, what is the reality is that many of these movements, of which we have both been part for many years, are a little bit tribal.
Yeah.
Some of us are very proud of our sort of moral superiority over some of the others, and we think that the practices have been diluted, that kind of thing. And it's quite a challenge to connect us all up together and see the bigger picture without feeling threatened by the existence of the other strands. But I think what you brought to us yesterday was important, because it's a bridge building exercise between our legitimately different movements, and we need to work together, but we don't have to dilute our principles in the process.
Absolutely, and the way I see it now is that now we have enough of these different strands, each one standing fully in their own individuality. They less and less need to play biffo with everyone else, so we can stand within our legitimacy, be it permaculture, biodynamics, organics, natural sequence farming, what have you, and let the consumers, be they farmers or food purchasers, find their way to the school or through the network. And so I encourage people to go to all these different learning opportunities and then go home and create what they want to create. Yeah? And that's the exciting part, and that's happening. Just to give you an example of that, the work of Peter Proctor in India, now Peter Proctor sort of fell out of use in New Zealand because certification got separated from education. So Peter used to teach biodynamics, and when you were successful, he would certify you. Then this whole idea of separating certification and education came in, and I can go on about that. But anyway, the farmers then paid for the certification, not the teaching. So Peter became redundant. He got swept up into India. Now, just to give you one example of what happened there, Jai Chaitanya Das down in Mysore, Kerala, he has a Harvard Business School, MBA, whatever, built a $12 million Hare Krishna temple in Bangalore. Then he came across this oft-quoted thing of the conversation between Steiner and Pfeiffer about how is it that all this work that Steiner was stimulating, people ended up arguing amongst themselves. And Steiner basically said it's to do with the food we are eating. It doesn't have the spiritual content, if you like. And so this Hare Krishna priest heard that. Then he decided, well, therefore we need if we're going to have a spiritual temple, then we need spiritual food. So he went off and bought some land, and like a lot of these cases, Second is the same in Egypt. He said afterwards, if he'd known anything about farming, he would never have bought that horrible piece of land. Yeah? But then he did biodynamic courses, permaculture courses, all these different threads he went and studied. Then he kicked everyone out, all his teachers out. He wouldn't let them in for 4 years while he constructed his own version. And that now is just such a most awesome place. Yeah? And I think that's, Biodynamics has one thread, but every individual has to take in what they're destined to take in and create what they are capable of creating. Yeah? And the joy of a place like this, and hopefully there will be more of them, where people can come and experience that diversity and difference in the taste of the food and the general gesture. Yeah?
I think what you say there, Hamish, about what may be the case, I think probably is the case, about the degradation of the vitality of food can be seen from a spiritual perspective, but also a very materialistic perspective, in the sense that modern industrial farming and food systems have not only degraded our natural capital, they're making people sick. And we are, in a way, the whole of Western society has been part of an enormous multi-generational feeding trial since the Second World War. We have fed our entire population without a control group, really, degraded food from industrial farming, heavily processed, etc. And we are now witnessing the cost of that experiment in ever escalating hospital costs, and it's so appropriate that there's a hospital just across the road from this place not being fed the food that you were growing here. And that's a very sad illustration of how far we've come from where we need to be. But the question is, can we make changes in our farming practice, which, as Rudolf Steiner advocated in his lectures in 1924, would revitalize the degraded food which we are now eating? And I think that the answer is we can, and we need to start where we are. We don't need to do a deep dive into biodynamic farming if we're not ready for that. And maybe some of us are slightly nervous about the spiritual element of Steiner's teaching. But if we take the first steps into organic farming and sustainable and regenerative agriculture, we can build on that. And I do now think that it's a very good time for us to build another bridge from the biological, organic, regenerative movement into some of these finer and more energetic elements of the study of agriculture, because there is no doubt in my mind that some of what Steiner brought for us out of his intuition nearly 100 years ago was grounded in something really important for us, which we need to know more about now.
Patrick, I don't think we can better that as a conversation piece. I just want to say it's been a joy and an honour to be hanging out with you for the last 24 hours, on and off. We wish you the best for your the Soil Conference Symposium next week. Hope to see you back in Australia soon. We might even get to the UK one day, Hamish. What do you reckon?
Sounds good.
Stir it up over there. Before you go, go.
Just, when you come,
Yep.
let's get together. And I think it's really important to build an international movement, a community of souls and centres of good practice, which enable us to build a bridge from where we are now towards the mainstream adoption of truly sustainable and regenerative food systems. Because if we don't, we're going to have irreversible climate change, more of the ecological catastrophe that is already unfolding, and more really bad health, which is unaffordable to treat. So we're in the last chance saloon in some ways. I don't want to be negative because I feel very positive about things, but there is a sense of urgency about the need for us to work together.
Talking about balloons, I want to get you with my hat on again there, Patrick. Just pop that on.
Okay.
On your there we go.
Okay,
Hey, he's been wearing that for the morning. He looks. Yeah, we're wondering where his horse is.
It hides up the fact that when I got back to the land as part of a commune in 1973, my hair was dark and also nearly down to my waist.
There you go.
And the other exciting thing is that you, Charlie, represent, there's another generation coming through. Us old hippies have done one round, but that's what's exciting me. There's a whole new generation coming through with their own version of what we experienced back in the 70s.
I feel that very strongly. I feel that, I was part of this consciousness shift, which you can't really explain, which takes place at certain periods in human history, the end of the 60s, the early 70s. And although the source maybe in the manifestation is different, the feel of the millennial view about the need to pay attention to these things just reminds me of how I felt back then. Mm-hmm. And that makes me feel incredibly optimistic about the future.
Absolutely.
Well, it's been an honour to, as I said, hang out with you, Patrick. Hamish, you're a legend. Talking about age groups, it's wonderful. We have in our workshop today, Ron, who's I think he's 82. And he's been in agriculture for 70 years, and that is wonderful. What an inspiration. He's not young, and he's still looking to learn and grow his knowledge of agriculture and in this case biodynamics. And he's got a farm just out of Byron Bay, and he's making some amazing honey there. and you know what an inspiration he is. So you know, from ages 0 to 100, you know, this stuff is applicable. Thanks, guys, and enjoy the rest of your tour, Patrick. Two legends.
Yeah. Greetings to the Biodynamic people in England. I was treasurer of the association for a number of years.
I'll pass those greetings on.